course we believe that, kind of good faith efforts is kind of a form of compliance. We want to reward good faith efforts. I did read the regional board's comment letter where they say, language counts, and that saying that good faith is in fact compliance could reduce the ability to enforce the order and talk about this in terms of requirements. We do not want to suggest that we support any language which reduces the enforceability of this order. But I do think that that it's been said over and over and over again. And I think as a board that there is the ability to fine-tune enforcement, and just because somebody, doesn't meet the number that they get enforced against. That's not the standard here. If the guy is if they're trying new things and those new things fail, that person should be rewarded, not enforced against. But how do you define good faith effort? And I'm especially troubled by the fact that, let's have a third party made up of farmers go and suggest, that they can kind of gauge good faith effort. That is rather troubling to me. And then finally, the last one, L. This is the annual compliance report. We look forward to the annual compliance report being restored fully, including the nitrogen parameters that I've discussed so much. So those nitrogen parameters are important. They need to be reported, and this needs to happen. We oppose the language that talks about avoid and minimize on the containment structures. Again, I don't know how you can say that minimizing, and this is waste discharge. That's actually the language in the order. We want to minimize the discharge of waste into the groundwater. How does that comply with the anti-deg requirements? No, you don't. I just don't see how minimizing that waste complies in any way, shape, or form with your responsibilities to protect degradation of groundwater. You need to avoid waste entering the groundwater, not just minimize it. We believe the nutrient management plans are important. We believe that they need to stay. We also believe that the efficacy report that is offered at the end needs to be offered by a professional, but that's not a strong recommendation. I've already covered the nitrogen balance ratios. The idea that you're not going to monitor containment structures is probably one of my primary points. Along the Central Coast, we believe that these tailwater ponds are not reused and pumped back onto the field. We believe that they are percolation and in evaporation ponds. In fact, as part of the regional board process, we even went on a tour where one of the growers said, yeah, when it fills up, I let fly into the Salinas River. We're not talking about reuse here. We're talking about these are perk ponds. And the idea that you would not monitor perk ponds that are, that's their purpose. I mean, just defies to me the idea of, again, protecting our groundwater.
Can you talk about that a little more
Sure.
specifically from the order? I mean, I think in looking at this, our understanding was that these ponds are used for recirculation, and there is an extent to which you actually want people to be doing that and reusing it on their fields rather than discharging it. There's a benefit to having them. Are you saying that we need to be able, or we should, figure out a way to decide if that's so?
Well, first of all, I think that the way that it's stated in the staff proposal is that generally this water is reused and therefore we don't need to, monitor it. And I'm suggesting to you that I believe that generally the water is not reused.
Right, and so I'm saying that then that suggests that we should find out.
Yes.
The answer versus generally from anybody.
But I do believe, and I think that you can find this out easily, I do believe that again, we don't need to wait on this. It's a simple question deserving a simple answer. I'm a pilot, and I fly over the Central Coast and over the Salinas Valley all the time. There are hundreds of these ponds. There are lots of them. These aren't big lakes. These are small ponds. And simply we need to find out how many of them are being reused, and if we learn that not many of them are being reused, that in fact they're perk ponds, they need to be monitored. And I would believe that the fallback is that they need to be monitored unless the growers can show that they're reusing these. The fallback is not, oh, let's not monitor them. The fallback is let's monitor them unless you can show us that you're reusing that water.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what I want to kind of impress upon you is that the cumulative impact of losing the nitrogen balancing ratio, which is controlling kind of that's your source control, and then eliminating the containment structure, that just all equals to me ineffective protection of groundwater. And I just don't see how you can do that. I think frankly, I think that it interferes with the guidance that your staff has actually given you in terms of the Agua decision. We also had some comments in our letter about the implementation of the cooperative groundwater monitoring program. We hope that you take advantage of this order to reinforce the fact that all wells supplying drinking water must be monitored, whether it be by a cooperative or not. They must be monitored, and that they must be monitored twice. In the same year, once in dry season and one in wet season. There seems to be this confusion that what we're trying to do is get trends. That's not what we're trying to do here. The dry season, wet season is so that we can see what kind of connection there is between the surface land practices and that shallow groundwater, and that is supplying that drinking water. And if there is a connection, that becomes not proof, but it becomes one line of evidence to suggest that maybe the grower is responsible for providing clean drinking water to that home. Because we all know that there are a variety of situations between a well that is supplying drinking water and maybe deeper, maybe screened at a deeper level and has good water, and maybe legacy water, versus water that is contaminated, and that is literally contaminated by the overlying property. And I would suggest that happens more often than what everybody would suggest it happens.
So in fact, you're agreeing with one of the ag folks that they wanted to focus on the on-farm wells where you could actually show that people were drinking the water. So that's where you would focus as well.
Well, I think that we agree, but we disagree. In other words, and maybe I'm reading it wrong because I'm me and they're them, so I'll give them that. But I think that what they were saying is let's focus on the drinking water and not do the other stuff. And I think that what we need to do is yes, we need to prioritize the drinking water, but we also need to characterize the groundwater aquifers, and we need to do this monitoring over the long haul, because we don't just need to protect drinking water, but we need to protect the aquifers that are supplying the drinking water. To more sharply answer your question, there's kind of two things that are going on here. Mm-hmm. There's one, testing where you want to know where that water is being drawn from, so you can characterize the aquifer so that you can understand what's going on in the water down there. That actually doesn't matter at all to that house. To that house, what matters is what is coming out of the tap. And that's all that matters. So there are two exercises that are required by the order. One exercise is to kind of discuss the water quality in the aquifers, and the other exercise is let's protect the water coming out of the tap and know what it is. Those are two separate exercises, and our problem with some of the cooperative groundwater programs is that they blend those two into a single exercise, and we don't think that that's appropriate, because if at the end of the day you have not tested the water coming out of the tap of all those homes and provided those people with information one way or another, whether it be by Environmental Justice Coalition for Water going out and telling those people, oh, you've got bad water, or whoever, because there is no requirement to report to the tenant, right? That's not there. And I would be wrong to tell you, oh, that's what I want to happen, because it's not there. But that information needs to be reported, publicly reported, so that then community groups can then go out and talk to residents and people that are drinking that water. I would be actually more happy if there was the requirement to then inform the tenant, but that requirement isn't in any of the orders, and it's just unfortunately not there. I want to address some of the comments that were in the written comments, and Ag has echoed repeatedly that they want various delays. I actually got a kick out of one comment because it says, we want this to move fast, but we also want it to move slow and be thoughtful and have lots of public forums and everything like that. It's been a long time that we've been working on this, a really long time. And I think that what we all have to appreciate is the fact that whether we like it or not, if I read between the lines of some of the petitions that were filed and some of the comments that have been filed by agriculture, whatever you decide will probably not be the final word. This is probably going to go on to a separate process after this. I hope not, but I believe that it might. And if so, you must have the strongest provisions possible in place as this moves through all these processes. You cannot grant stays and extend the stays. You need to do the best job you can at protecting groundwater now, while these expert panels, while all these other things are decided and move on. I tend to agree with the regional board when they say, look, I don't think that the expert panel work is going to be done. They didn't say this, I'll say it, by maybe April. I think that that's overly ambitious, and it'll probably take longer, especially given all the public comment. And given that, you know, let's look forward to the next order, because these orders are an iterative process. And frankly, we'll be starting the next order soon. We also heard you should exclude tile drains. Tile drains are critical. They are this incredible area of productivity in our area, those tile drain areas. They are important to agriculture, but we need to learn how to farm and how to live with shallow groundwater farming practices. The only way we're going to get the information that we need is to monitor those tile drains. To simply say, oh no, these areas are too valuable, let's not look, is not an argument. You know, we need that information. This isn't about enforcement. This is about iteratively and progressively trying to improve the way that we have practices on farming land and the way that we move forward. Oops. This is the water that I live with. This water is 3 miles from my house. This is 3 miles in the other direction. This particular water is from a sampling site called the Reclamation Ditch at LaGuardia. This water has tested toxic every single time for the past 5 years. I think there was one test where it made it through. I've actually heard growers say, it's toxic because it kills a flea. Here's a cup. If they just think it'll kill a flea, this water tests toxic every single time. And to diminish those toxicity results is frankly irresponsible. Our water is really bad. You are my solution. You are the solution. The frame of suggesting that, oh, this is about farming is actually about, in my mind, a bad frame. This expert panel that you're going to have, let's have public health people on that panel. Let's not stack the panel with agriculture experts and CDFA, with all due respect. Let's have experts that know farming practices. That's going to be really important. But if there's an economist on the panel, the economist should not be talking about, oh, the cost to agriculture. The economist should be talking about the cost of not doing something to public health and to the environment. That's the real cost. I'm going to conclude right now with my 1 minute, 15 seconds. The May 2013 issue of National Geographic was about nitrates, and the article was actually subtitled, "If We Don't Watch Out, Agriculture Could Destroy Our Planet." Now, National Geographic isn't exactly, you know, radical. They're actually pretty conservative, but that was the subtitle. And the article actually is interesting, and it highlights solutions. And those solutions are coming out of places like the Midwest. And frankly, I'm a little tired of some of the stuff, and you guys can relate to this. The solutions of low-impact development, they came out of the East. The solutions of now farming practices are coming out of the Midwest. Why aren't we leading? Why aren't we leading? I just don't understand that. We have the best educated farmers in the Salinas Valley, and they can step up to the plate. They are able. We have some of the best educational institutions in the United States. Bar none, they can step up to the plate. Why are we not the ones innovating and offering solutions? Why are we not leading? Regulation has the ability to drive innovation. I believe that. So I believe that you have a role in making us leaders. What regulation does is it provides the backstop. It changes the trajectory of what people are doing. That's what it does. I've heard several people talk about all the great things that they're doing, and the reality is some of the things that they're doing are in response to the regulations that have been proposed. And that's good. Those things are great. Those things are wonderful. But I do have to wonder how many of those things would have happened if the threat of regulation and greater regulation was not hanging over their heads. So you have a role. I'm asking you to step up and be leaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schimmick. Questions?
I've got your comments on the issue of the cooperative committees and see what your point is there, but then got a little confused when you were talking about drinking water. So is it your position that if wells that are used for drinking water were required to be monitored and sampled, that you'd support the cooperative groups, in particular the one that is underway at the regional level?
So there's two cooperative kind of monitoring programs. There's the surface water monitoring program and then the proposed, and there were actually two programs that were approved by the regional board for groundwater monitoring. One is a very small program. The other is a very large program up in kind of my neck of the woods, the Salinas Valley area. We do not support the cooperative groundwater program that is being implemented in the north portion, the larger program. That portion is the one that I was speaking of that basically blends all these tasks and says, oh, let's just kind of, you know, suggest what the water, let's characterize the groundwater as opposed to test all those individual drinking water wells. Now, the regional board did send them a letter saying, you must test all drinking water wells. But then there is an entire paragraph after that of the reasons why they might not have to test them. And so, look, it's just simple in my mind. If you supply drinking water to a household, that water should be tested if it falls under this order. That gap of not knowing what is in these 1 and 2 household connections, that gap has been shown to be a gap of information gap in a number of committees, a number of task forces, a number of legislative kind of trying to sort out what the next steps are. You've got the ability to fill that gap for a number of households and make it safer for the, make at least it be known that the water is tainted or not for a number of households under this order. I just don't understand why you would not, and this is going to come out accusatory, and I don't mean it to, but I don't understand why you would not do that. I really don't. It's to me, it's fairly black and white that you have the ability to provide, require and provide this information. You should do it.
So just to make sure I understand, as long as testing is required for wells that are used to supply drinking water, you support the cooperative approach? That's the only reason you oppose. I guess that might be a better way of saying it.
Yeah. So there are a number of things in that proposal that make me rather anxious. But let me be very clear. I believe the cooperative approach for monitoring especially is a valuable approach because it adds consistency to the monitoring. Mm-hmm. It adds a certain amount of reliability. It also adds a certain consistency of reporting. And I also agree that they have the ability to, do a certain amount of evaluation. They're talking about offering these contour maps. I believe that those contour maps will be helpful. But I also believe that you need to be able to drill down and get the basic information. My background is science. And when I was doing science and sea otter research, I was certainly able to take my results, my data, and interpret that data any way I wanted. I also had the responsibility to then provide that data, that raw data, to anyone that basically asked. It's the same here. I don't have a problem with the contour maps. I do have a problem if that is the reporting mechanism. We need to know the results of those well tests so that the tenants and the owners of those wells can be notified by some mechanism. I don't care if there is this half-mile fuzzing of the location. That doesn't matter to me. Just so that we can know the owner and the tenant and the address where that water is being supplied to so that the person can be notified. It's a matter of public health. But to be more specific, is it just that provision? There's also that cooperative monitoring program does not require them to go in and monitor twice. It's one sample, and then they say, oh, we'll consider. And also, it doesn't require the Tier 3 growers, which you actually support, doing annual sampling. If a Tier 3 grower becomes part of the co-op, they do one sample in their home. So I think that I'm supportive of the cooperative approach because I think that there can be cost savings. I think that there can be interpretation. I think that there can be, efficiencies there. That cooperative monitoring program is less about doing right for those landowners and more about kind of smudging everything together and creating these contour maps and then not reporting the base information. And to me, those are the important things.
Can I ask you a question? If of course I can. If the contour map shows that the groundwater in an area where there's a well is contaminated, why wouldn't that tell you that that well is contaminated? It sounds like from what you said, the potential, of course, is for the well to be even deeper, and it might be clean. It could go either way. Just help me understand why the contour map that shows the contamination isn't enough. I agree with you on the understanding the drinking water issue. I think many people in ag agree that that's the issue, the prime issue we do need to deal with.
So I think that if you're talking about drinking water now and the interpretation of the contour map, let's just assume that you are a tenant and you find yourself in that in that area that you're either close or maybe slightly in that area of polluted water. What is going to be your reaction? So part of my answer is I think it shifts the burden of that testing from the person that is actually owning the well and is actually delivering that water. It shifts the burden for the testing from them to that tenant, who then says, gosh, I need to get my water tested, or I need to ignore it and just go on. So I think it shifts it to a different person. I also think that there's a matter of accuracy of those maps. I really think that as you move ahead here, and this goes to your expert panel, and this also goes to the efficacy monitoring that is one of our broader points, you're really running into a sample size problem. So this is my ex-science part of me coming out. You're running into a science problem here where it's sample size. And to show the efficacy of this order, to show any kind of reliability of those contour maps, you need a certain sample size to be able to have any kind of statistical confidence in that data. Statistical confidence is partly driven by sample size. And so if you have a low sample size, you're not going to have confidence in those contour maps. And this also goes to the individual monitoring. If you don't have enough data, you're not going to be able to show the efficacy of this order, which frankly is required by code.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Shimmick, for your
You're welcome.
comments. And, we do take that responsibility seriously. You've focused in on these containment structures, and I hear you from your personal experience and observations. So, that's valuable observations to consider. And yet, we're trying to recognize the benefits of the reuse and everything. And I'm concerned by having such strong language as avoid that we basically will be requiring, engineered linings and things like that. And like you said, they're everywhere if you fly over the area.
Yes.
So I'm concerned using such strong language as avoid when we can achieve a lot through minimize. And maybe avoid some unintended, unneeded costs, especially given that containment structures will silt in and have potentially less percolation. So where is some of our room to move here in terms of recognizing the benefits of containment structures to avoid discharged surface water, which we have all sorts of issues with nitrate-fueled problems in surface water? So recognizing there's benefits to these, what are some ideas in helping us navigate this so we're not requiring engineered liners all over the Central Coast?
I actually think that you've offered that solution in the language that I'm not objecting to, because what you've done is that you've said you've actually added language that then adds a list of ways that you can avoid percolating to groundwater, like you actually list reuse of that water is a way to avoid that percolation. So what my problem is that you've doubled down. In other words, you've provided this language that says, and here's what we mean by avoid or minimize, is to have these, and you actually provide a list. I could look it up for you, but on the list was reuse. On the list was, let's talk about what that water is in the first place. It's water that's run off, right? So one of the things on the list is not have, manage your water so that you have less runoff. Perhaps some vegetation that can use some of that water and sequester some of that water. Perhaps, these bark structures that degrade the water. You actually list them. And so that's what you can just switch the words from minimize to avoid, and then if you keep that list, you have then specified what, in your mind, what avoid means. Part of that list is to line, but frankly, that would be a rather costly way of compliance. I personally do not believe that these things need to be lined to not percolate to groundwater. I personally believe that if you minimize the amount of water going there in the first place, and then you also have some practices, and you're not specifying what they are, but some practices, I think that works. But I think language that explicitly says, well, we're going to minimize waste percolating to groundwater is essentially saying we're going to allow a certain amount of waste. And and I'm not a lawyer, but but at least by my reading of some of this stuff, I don't see how that complies with the law. Maybe it does, and maybe I'm just wrong. But I just hate to see language that essentially says we're going to allow you to percolate waste to the groundwater, because that's the flip side of what that word minimize says to me.
Helpful. Any other questions? Great.
Chair Marcus, I did have a question for Mr. Shimmick.
You may ask it.
Thank
Oh
you.
no, I'm scared of these guys.
No, that was helpful.
Sorry about that. If Mr. Shimmick, if you'd roll back to the table that you gave the examples of the nitrate ratio.
I'm trying.
No problem. Thank you. And so you chose, I'm assuming you prepared the table.
Yes.
You chose 240 as your number for the nitrogen required by the crop.
Yes.
For both grower 1, grower 2.
Yes.
Do you recall the range that was allowable when you were, I'm assuming, looking at some reference number when you chose 240?
I don't recall the range. There was a range given of both of those. As I prepared this, I tried to pick midpoint of the range. So do I recall the range? No, I don't. I tried to pick midpoint of the range.
Okay. So let's assume that 290 could conceivably be within the range, and therefore if grower 2 put down that his nitrogen requirement by the crop was 290, he'd have a ratio of 1.0.
Yes, but again, so they are having to, and so yes, and I don't think that what we're trying to do is necessarily single out people at 1.0 or 1.2. I think what we're trying to get them to do is say, here's how much my crop needed, here's how much I applied. Here's the value in my mind. It's number one, it's getting them to try and meet a ratio, and the second value is that we gather a huge amount of information as we go. And that's one of the huge values of having these numbers reported is look, we might learn that romaine, and I'm going to pick an easy example, romaine, you know, their numbers are coming in between 250 and 310. What we need to worry about is a few years down the road when somebody says, well, my crop needed 500. That becomes the outlier that you need to further talk about and investigate. Without getting these numbers reported, you don't develop that experience. And I agree with the growers when they say that this is an art. And we're asking them to report what they think the crop needed. So I hope I've kind of answered your question, but with a nuance, that part of the goal and objective here is to gain experience as we go.
So if you would for me, would roll to the slide before, please. So I'm proposing a hypothetical, you certainly answer if you choose to. What if we, for all the growers, split out crop A, for each cropping cycle? I'm assuming you're saying that they grew two crops within the annual period of the report. So what if there was a separate column for each one so that they did report those separately for each cropping cycle?
Right.
And they reported the crop they grew, romaine. So we knew that they grew romaine, they put, just assuming now that, we divide those numbers in half or whatever, that those were the numbers that went there.
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple of gaps in the order that I think need to be plugged in. And one is it asks them to report crop type. And so you might get leafy greens as opposed to romaine lettuce, and I think that should be corrected. I never mention that, and that's probably an oversight. But the second piece is that what you're saying is, well, we can surmise this information because we'll know their crop. And I just think that what you're asking the regional board then to do is to match up everybody's location, everybody's and do a great amount of individual farm work when there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of farms. And what would be better to do is ask folks to report this, and so that the database can then sort these people, because I also believe that part of the art of this is that the lower Salinas Valley west side may be different from the Salinas Valley east side. And I think that if you ask the regional board to do these matches by hand, you're asking the regional board to do an awful lot of hand work, where I believe that these growers know this number.
Thank you.
So what we're talking about is the grower estimating what they thought it needed and what they put on it, even if there isn't a UC Davis or somebody else's piece of paper that said this is the exact number. So you're acknowledging that there's an art to it and saying that what you want is to know what they did.
That's right.
Okay.
Because I think that through time what will happen, so there's kind of a nuance in what I'm saying, and that I've kind of communicated to some of the board members. One is, you know, the basis of our petition is that we think that this needs to be, that they need to meet these ratios. And I am not going to undermine my petition by standing here and saying, well, no, actually that's not what I really require. I will suggest to you that I think that it is essential that these numbers be reported, and that it is a huge gap if these numbers are not reported. I hope you understand the
Yeah, I can
nuance
see
of what
the
I
difference.
just said.
No, they're two different issues. That's actually helpful.
Yeah.
Hey, Darren, I got a question for you. You're familiar with the Central Valley's ag waiver and the WDR program. What level of this type of information, to your recollection, is being collected in the Central Valley? And, you know, is it, are they holding it sort of in-house, not reporting it, or is it?
Actually, Perry Clausen is going to testify later, and that'd be a perfect question for him because he's the holder of the first WDR that the Central Valley's issued. So I'd say
Hold that thought.
Okay.
hold that
Yeah.
thought.
Hold that thought.
If you don't
Make a
ask it,
note.
I will.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're so welcome, and you've been very generous with your questions. I appreciate the good questions, and thank you so much.
Thanks for the presentation. PowerPoint is helpful too. Next, we are moving right along to the EJ panel. I have 4 speaker cards, so if you don't mind coming up and stating your names and what order you're presenting, so we have kind of a roadmap to how you want to use the half hour.
Or,
We also
Steve,
have
Bailey.
a PowerPoint.
Oh, good. Okay, PowerPoint.
Thank you.
What? You need water?
I don't think
Oh,
he
you
wants-
do not want that. No. You don't want to do a Hugh Carey on us, do you?
All right. Madam Chair, members of the board, staff, my name is Colin Bailey. I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water. We are a statewide coalition of primarily grassroots community groups and their advocates, and collectively we range to every region and corner of this great state. As well as collectively we are involved in just about every forum where the health of our groundwater and the resulting quality of the drinking water is debated. So there is considerable expertise that is represented here today. I am pleased to be joined by Jeanette Pantoja, who's a community worker with California Rural Legal Assistance from Salinas, and Jennifer Clary, who is with Clean Water Action, as well as one of several community members who have joined us today from the Salinas Valley. You will hear first from Marta Saldivar, who's from Springfield. So collectively, our presentation and our written comments, which you've already received, are making the case that the draft ag order has some good elements to it that are worthy of our support and should go forward without further delay. At the same time, there are areas that require some significant strengthening. And in some instances, that will be by leaving in place some of those items, some of those provisions that the Central Coast Regional Board adopted. Now, let's see, how do I work? Rolling, there we go, all right. One typo there, that is AB 685, notwithstanding pending, yes, oops. Notwithstanding pending objections to its mention, it is our position that this provides some context for the State Board's decision on the ag waiver. Specifically, AB 685 adopted as state policy that every human being has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water, including for drinking. And it is the obligation, we believe, an ongoing obligation of this board to consider that policy when adopting or establishing policies such as the ag border. Seemingly in keeping with this, oops, didn't make it. The Central Coast Ag Order has placed the highest priority on public health. And to quote directly from finding 6 of the Central Coast Order, there are thousands of people in the Central Coast who have nitrate levels in their drinking water that exceed the standard. They've identified this as a significant threat to human health, and in fact it's getting worse every year. But we don't know the particularities about exactly what this increase is. And we absolutely need to know so that we can take corrective action. The board, as it has identified itself, has the authority to require monitoring of the private and domestic wells, as well as require the provision of alternative or replacement water services. You will hear shortly from one community member whose experience speaks to whether that has been effective and how that can be improved. So who is being affected? This is a little small, so I apologize for the type there, but what you will see is if we take seriously our commitment as a society to the principle of non-discrimination and equal opportunity, we have to act on the knowledge that disadvantaged communities are the most vulnerable to drinking water. And that includes communities based on class and by race. And what you'll see there is that the upper left chart, at least from my perspective, is the cluster in the east there is disadvantaged communities, which matches fairly closely those communities who have high levels of nitrates in their drinking water level, some of them exceeding the 150 and 200 milligrams per liter. Additionally, building off of what Mr. Shimmick said earlier, those systems that serve the smallest number of connections, you'll see in that top graph there, just barely with good eyesight, that the cluster in the left quadrant in the 2 to 4 to 6 connection range are frequently in high exceedance of the nitrate level. So those communities those systems rather, that are least capable of addressing the problem themselves are the ones most likely to encounter the problem. So the point is that this is urgent. It is something that when considering the range of options, this board needs to consider the human right to water policy. And here now to talk about the some of the communities that are affected so that we have a human context for what this looks like on the ground is my colleague Jeanette Pantoja from CRLA.
Again, thank you for agreeing to hear us today. I represent the Salinas Valley Safe Drinking Water Program. It's an initiative started by CRLA approximately a year ago. And since then, we have been aggressively doing outreach to communities within the Salinas Valley that have nitrate contamination of their water system. There's a couple of representatives from those communities here today, and so I will be interrupted at least once by one of those community members. The first community you see, I guess behind you, is the community of, okay, you have screens. The community of San Lucas, which is about 300 farm workers. Their drinking water violates the nitrate MCL since March 2011 after the well where, the land where their well is located, just shortly after the land where their well is located switched from grapes to row crops. So currently under a cleanup and abatement order, they're supplied interim drinking water. but as our work on the ground has shown, it's been really difficult to implement that program in a way that makes the water accessible to most residents. So there's a resident from here, that community here today, so I'll just move on. Well, how do I switch again? Okay, so I'll be interrupted now by a community member of Springfield Terrace, and she'll talk a little bit about her own experiences within the community.
Hello, my name is Marta Saldivar, and I'm here because I want all of you to know what it's to struggle not able to drink water from the faucet. For us residents living in Springfield, we have struggled with trying to obtain clean water. Since I moved there in 2008, we buy our own water to cook and drink. I spend an average of $80 per month on bottled water. I worry that living in this area could be hazard for our health, as well as future concerns of not having safe, clean water. The majority of residents are low-income farm workers who are raising families with young children. They are struggling to provide their families with clean water because of the cost. Some of these residents don't even have a way of traveling to purchase water. We need to travel at least 10 minutes to get to the closest store. When I first moved to Moss Landing, I knew that we couldn't drink the water. I thought, well, if I boil the water, it should be okay. You know, that's what everybody thinks. Well, the first time when I got my bill from Sunny Mesa, that's the company provide the water for us, we get this letter explaining with more details what kind of water we had on our houses, and they say that our water is has 6 times more nitrate than that it is safe to drink. That if we boil the water, it even concentrates more that nitrate, so it's making more hazardous for us. Every time I cook, I have a dilemma. Should I wash the vegetables, or should I wash whatever I cook in, or should I just cook it the way it is? Because we don't know what is worse, using the water or just cooking the way it comes from the store, because we don't really know how bad is the water, what is going to be. My concern is our future, what is on long term, how it's going to affect us. One of the farmers here earlier, he said that, I think it was Mr. Thomas, say that they are businessmen, that they're farmers, all what they want is to farm. Well, we as residents of California, all we want is clean water to drink. That's all we're asking for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll move on. This other is informally known as Camp 21, but its formal name is Iverson and Jack's Apartments. It's a labor camp near Chular, and it's pretty isolated. The community has about 165 residents, and what I've heard from residents is at least for 18 years they've had contaminated drinking water. The owner recently received funding for a feasibility study. She's made several attempts to find clean water around the camp. The most recent study shows some promise, but it's been a long and arduous process for her, and we're working actively to help her out too. More recently, we hooked up with an owner of Alpine Court Labor Camp. This is a community about 60 residents. They don't really qualify for a lot of funding because, like a lot of disadvantaged communities, they're embedded within a really large census tract. So the first thing we're planning to do within there is a median household income survey so that they can apply for some interim funding. We've talked about what a long-term solution would look like for them. The best one is possibly connecting with the city of Gonzales. Even the county thinks that drilling a new well is not a good idea given the trend in nitrate contamination in the surrounding area. There's a resident here of San Gerardo who will speak on behalf of his community, but what I like to point out is that a lot of officials and staff within the county of Monterey consider this to be a success story. Residents within the community will tell you that it's clearly not. They struggled with contaminated drinking water for a decade, and at the end they just got water rates that were 4 or 5 times what they used to pay. So for everybody's benefit, I'll just go quickly through some of the nitrate health impacts. Some of the acute impacts are known as blue baby syndrome, which is, I think, the more famous impact. And that's just infants below 6 months can't absorb oxygen in their blood and they suffocate. Severe gastroenteritis is another one. Chronic long-term effects. I mean, take into account that a lot of the communities I just talked about have had nitrate-contaminated drinking water for more than a decade, and we don't know how long some of these private well systems or state and local small systems have had nitrate contamination because of the lack of information. So the chronic issues are cancer, impaired in utero growth, preterm birth. There's a study that came out recently that supports that finding even further. The same with the birth defects. Another one's pancreatitis and nervous system defects. Oops. Within the picture is a lady by the name of Maria Socorro Nuño. She, I think, is reliant on a domestic well, but within her same street there's 2 what's called local small systems. Those are 2 to 4 connections, and both of those systems are well over 200 parts per million nitrate. So like Colin said, these are the smallest, most vulnerable systems that don't have a lot of options in terms of funding, information, or organizational support. 25% of Monterey County residents rely on water systems with 14 or fewer connections. And Monterey County monitors these systems a lot, unlike other counties that usually only monitor down to the 5 connection system. So we've worked cooperatively with the county and have a really good relationship where we share a lot of information. And most recently, information that they gave to me revealed that, you know, the number of systems exceeding the nitrate MCL in 2013 is about 187. That's a jump of about 42 systems within the last 2 years. And the number of those systems that exceed 120 parts per million is about 26 systems, 4 more than 2 years ago. It's important to note that these systems, 120 is about the cutoff for what a point of use or point of entry system is certified at. So the only solution short of a new well is bottled water for these residents. Domestic well, there's estimated to be about 15,000 within Monterey County. The ag order estimated about 40,000 within the whole Central Coast region. The Gamma Domestic Well Project indicated about 20% of those wells in the Central Coast region exceeded the nitrate MCL. I think about 79 of those wells were within Monterey County, and that was 11% within just Monterey County. There's 942 wells under the ag order. So realistically, if you said monitor every domestic well, we'd have information for 942 more domestic well systems. I mean, it's important to understand how little funding is currently available to do that kind of scale monitoring. And the number of residents that are kind of in that situation, not really knowing about the quality of their water, is potentially tremendous. It was interesting from my perspective to hear about the 1988 report that was done and how there's been multiple attempts to address this problem since then. I wasn't even born yet in 1988.
Okay, I'm not going to call you a show-off.
Okay.
Be impressed with your talent despite your youth.
Thank you. So just within my lifetime, I mean, this problem has continued to grow and hasn't been effectively addressed. I think the final point I want to make is the time to act is now within this waiver. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
She's so hard to follow. My name's Jennifer Clary, and I know she graduated from college less than a year ago.
I know, it's amazing.
I did not. My name is Jennifer Clary. I'm the water policy analyst for Clean Water Action, and I've been working on both the Central Coast and the Central Valley ag orders for several years now. And I think the thing that we want to remind you of is that the ag waiver that this ag waiver replaced did nothing for groundwater, didn't cover groundwater, didn't refer to groundwater. So what our urgency is that you implement something. And the reason why we supported this waiver and did not petition it to change it is that we wanted it to be implemented. And so we just want to emphasize that. And so if you're looking at something, we've been told it's going to take decades to restore the quality of the groundwater aquifers. Well, if we wait 2 decades to do something, it takes that much longer. And it's also the fact that it may take decades to clean up the groundwater aquifer, but the shallow aquifers will respond first. So the areas that are most at risk where people don't necessarily know their groundwater quality are the ones that we want to prioritize for this order. So in looking at that, I thought I moved that forward. Oh, I'm going the wrong way.
It's common.
Geez. There we go. Got it. So basically what we want is for you to do something now, and I hate this saying, but don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But I heard that. So what we really
Bob
want is...
Hattoy is proud of you.
Pardon me?
Bob Hattoy is proud of you.
Okay, good. So what we really want is information. So an effective program has information that will tell you who's doing what and where. You know, sitting in these stakeholder processes for several years, I really believe that all the people in that room are implementing best practices and encouraging best practices. But the difficulty is everyone's not in the room. Most people aren't in the room, so we don't know who's doing what or where. And since we're not measuring water quality, we don't know the impact of it. So that's all we want. We want to know what's going on. So the collection of information is an essential part of this. And to be honest, an essential reason why we want that information and why we want clear compliance standards is so we can get enforcement funding from people who aren't complying so that we can provide safe drinking water to communities.